Hey everyone, welcome to the Darshan Talks interview series. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help you trust the products you depend on. As you may know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I help companies with FDA regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about devices, obsess over pharmacy, this is a live stream for you. I do have to emphasize, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, but I'm not your attorney or pharmacist. So this is neither legal advice nor clinical advice. I do these interviews because they're a lot of fun. I get to talk, catch up with friends. I get to learn something new every single time. And it's always nice to know when someone's listening. But if you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. If you want to ask our guest questions, please feel free to do so. After the talk, please share the video. And you can ask the questions in the comments, and I know our guest loves to interact with them as well. I do want to emphasize that these are considerations, but they don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the guest or their employers. So I do want to put that disclaimer out there as well. You can always reach out to me and find me on Twitter at Darshan Talks, or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. Our interview today, we have called it Office Dynamics, and we're going to try to find a way of wedging that in somehow. But the truth is, we have no idea what we're going to talk about. There are some topics we kind of just sort of discussed, and I kind of want to find out a little bit more about it. I want to talk a little bit about year-end budget planning. What does that look like, and the impact on 2022? How do you keep planning for Black Swan events? At what point is it not a Black Swan event anymore? So we'll talk about what that means and the implications thereof. We'll talk about the ever-present issue of, well, how do we get people to help us in a world where there are not enough people to go around, which is such a weird thing to say. But that, and then the issue of, let's say you got the people, you had the budget, how do you grow? And that's going to be another question as well. So our guest for today is the SVP of Global Regulatory Affairs and Quality and Operational Excellence at Cyrus Pharmaceuticals. I have never pronounced that name right. Cyrus, I believe, is how you actually do it. It's always a pleasure having him on. Our guest for today, Ashley Preston. Hey, Ashley.
Hello. Good to see you again, sir.
Pleasure as always. So is it Cyrus, or something else?
It's Cyrus. Cyrus in the Greek island.
Oh, is that right? Okay, I did not know there was a Greek island called Cyrus.
There is.
I'd heard of Mykonos and Lesbos. Never heard of Cyrus. Now I've learned something new. Thank you for that. Is it a particularly beautiful island?
As I understand it, yes. I haven't been myself, but I would like to go one day.
One day, okay, fair enough. So let's talk a little bit about where we are. It's November. It feels like the second week of January right now because I have no idea where the rest of the year went. But we're already talking about budget planning for next year. So my question for you is, let's talk a little bit about that. How do you plan and for next year? Do you plan with this idea that COVID is going to be around next year? Do you plan with the idea that life will be back to normal, whatever that means? Or do you plan for there's a hybrid and this is how we're going to cope with the hybrid, and that's probably going to be what our next 10 years look like overall?
Right. Yeah, I think we have to plan that there is still some ongoing impact of COVID, whether it's the pandemic directly or whether it's the leftover of the pandemic, which we see is a labor shortage and shortage of in terms of resourcing at the company level, getting people into the company, hiring, new hires coming in. There's just the pool of candidates is so small at the moment, and it's so hard, so competitive to get good candidates in the door. Let alone to then bring them on board. And so that is a challenge for companies, I think, staffing up for, and will remain, I think, for the next, year at least. And then on the other side, when we think about clinical development at the sites as well, because everybody's experiencing a labor shortage. And so for the sites to execute on clinical development, on studies, that's also a challenge. And that challenge then translates for the companies to try and find optimal ways to conduct their trials and to actually enroll patients and get the study results we need to bring these new medicines to patients.
So you talk about the problem with labor, which I'm agreeing with you. There's just far too few people, whether we're saying qualified or even trainable, to get to a point where you can use them. The solution that then gets thrown out is technology is the answer. Have you found that technology is bridging the gap, or are we still too far overall for the problems you're facing? Not getting into specifics.
Right. No, I think that and I think technology-wise, thinking about bringing the trial to the patient in that regard
Sure.
is always an option, and we certainly try to do that as much as we can. But even then, that takes a certain level of human resource to make that happen, and that can still be a challenge. Whilst I think some companies may be at different stages of their capability in doing that, and I do know some of the larger pharma companies have invested heavily in this clinical trial technology and the idea of decentralized clinical trials. For the smaller organizations, that can be a bit more challenging. But we try as much as possible, and learning from COVID, trying to be as accommodating as possible in terms of the patient journey through the trial, and be as flexible as possible. And certainly FDA with their COVID guidance enabled that to an extent, so long as we have the appropriate guardrails in place and all the documentation is in place. But I think there's a lot of scope for that moving forward. And I think as an industry, we should try to harness that wherever possible and as much as possible, because ultimately we still need, to have safe and effective medicines, we need to study them in clinical trials. That's going to be an ongoing concern. And so the more efficiently we can do that, the faster we can bring safe and effective medicines to patients.
So there's tons of stuff to discuss in what you just said. So I'm going to pick on each piece, each component, hopefully get through a few of them at least. But you talked about the idea of decentralized clinical studies, which is great. It's a super hot thing. Everyone's talking about it. But when you talk to sites, their response is, why would I be part of a decentralized study? In the end, I'm paying the PI, and you're saying that I continue to pay the PI and you move the study away from me. Why would I agree to that? Why would I be gung-ho for a study like that? Have you seen that pushback? What has been your feedback from attempts in that direction?
No, yeah, I personally haven't seen that approach, but I think that certainly, Cyrus, we haven't necessarily gone so far as that in that decentralized model. But what we have tried to do is be as flexible as possible around the conduct of the study and patient visits and so on, to make sure that you were accommodating the COVID pandemic situation. I can see where, just thinking out loud, that the idea is not so much, I suppose the idea is to bring the study to where the patients are. And one of the biggest concerns in doing any clinical trial is finding a patient population, and they are dispersed across the country, across the globe. And particularly, as there's more and more research into rare diseases, or as we break down, subcategories or subtypes of a disease, thinking about oncology and the different biomarker subtypes you might be looking for in a given population, it can become harder and harder to find enough patients to enroll in your study, in a given country or even globally. So you need to cast your net as wide as possible, and that either means opening up, a multitude of sites who may then only individually recruit a small number of patients, just simply by virtue of the population of patients available to them, to that site. Whereas the more you can decentralize, the investigators can still be involved in the study and still contribute to the study from a clinical and scientific perspective. But you have the ability then to access more of the patients. More patients can potentially benefit during the study. And again, back to the whole concept: the faster we can, more efficiently we can conduct clinical development, the faster these medicines can get to patients.
Right, but the pushback I've seen is, yes, I can be part of the studies, but the problem I would face is I don't get any of the margins because I'm not a central part anymore. I'm one of the many moving components, which, for better or for worse, that's one of the thoughts. Let me reframe the question for you in a different way. One of the things I've seen is CVS Health came out and said that they want to be part of clinical trials. So you're seeing this concept at this point of pharmacies becoming the new sites because they're more widely available. They often have access to the patient information. And when you're talking about someone like CVS, you probably have the same reach as a Kaiser, but global, but nationwide, which is massive. Do you see that being a direction for the future, or do you see? I mean, you start thinking about simple things like a 1572. There's no provision of 1572 to make the pharmacist at a CVS clinic the PI. So how do you foresee a world like that playing out?
Right, that's an interesting concept. That's I hadn't seen that news from CVS, but I would say that we have to maintain the relationship, that the physician patient relationship still has to be central to any. I mean, even outside of a clinical trial, that treatment relationship between the physician and the patient is really center to the quality of healthcare. So I think if we can't move away from that in any way, and it's particularly even more so important, arguably, in a clinical trial, where it's really critical that the patient is fully informed and their treatment is managed in the appropriate way. So the only way that you can then implement a decentralized model is by making sure you have the appropriate guardrails, controls, quality in place to make sure that is maintained. The patient-physician relationship and the informed consent of the patient is maintained, and that they have a full understanding of what's happening during the study. So I think that's where perhaps we don't see necessarily as rapid progress towards a fully decentralized model, because there are things that we have to do to make sure we maintain that ethical standard there, and so that's not as simple as it's easier said than done when you move to that type of model. And so we want to make sure that before we take steps in that direction, that we have thought of all of the considerations around maintenance of that physician patient relationship,
which is really interesting. So when you talk about that, the key thing that comes to mind for me is the idea of, can you minimize patient visits by augmenting with telemedicine, which is what everyone's sort of talking about. Have you either done much work in that space or seen work being done in that space? And what is your opinion on the viability of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly I've been involved in some discussions at the BIO, which is the Biotech Industry Association. When the COVID guidance from FDA first came out, there was a lot of discussion around that. I think in the industry, I think there's reasonably broad support for that, for the adoption of telemedicine where possible. Obviously, the part of the constraint around conducting studies and patients accessing trials is their proximity to a trial center, to the clinical study site, and that gets back to our previous sort of commentary around accessing patients wherever they are in the world who need therapies. So I think that insofar as you can introduce telehealth visits and minimize the need of the patient to be in the clinic for things that aren't necessarily required face to face, in implementing telehealth or implementing home health visits for certain procedures is possible under the right circumstances, with the right sort of controls and maintaining quality. So I think that is definitely a great step, because that minimizes the burden on the patient. They're still able to then access that trial, access that new therapy, but without the constant need to go in for study visits. And that is really one of the key learnings, I think, to your point, that has been born out of COVID, out of the pandemic, is to try to, wherever possible, minimize that visit time.
So to me, it's kind of interesting. I heard my own echo. To me, it's kind of interesting, this idea that we know where we want to go. We want to be more patient-centric in clinical trials. We want to be more focused on the needs of patients. And if that means telemedicine, that's great. If that means more home healthcare stuff, that's great. I guess my question for you is, I'm seeing this even at the CRO level. Do you, and at the site level, do you see CROs being qualified to help with this? And what I'm talking about is, there are very few CROs, I would argue, who actually understand the rules around telemedicine. So for them to now monitor a study that's being done via telemedicine, do they have the capabilities? Or do they just sort of take it at face value that the resources that are in place are compliant with the standards that are expected? And this came up not in the context of telemedicine for me, but in the context of data controls. The question is, there are very few CROs who actually understand things like HIPAA privacy, and is a particular provider appropriately qualified to store data outside just accepting that the provider says that they are. What has been your experience around that? Are CROs, I'm sorry, I'm going to add a little bit more to that. CROs, in my experience, are very qualified at understanding FDA regs. Are you finding it easy to find CROs who understand the things that impact FDA regs, including data privacy, including telemedicine rules, including practice of medicine rules, if they're, for example, the patients are in Arkansas and your physician sitting in New York City? And how does all of that play out?
I mean, I think in my own experience thus far, we have, because we haven't sort of instituted the full sort of telemedicine or decentralized model in that sense, where your physician is on the other side of the country to the patient. We haven't dealt with that type of scenario, but I think that it's inevitable, and in the business model that we have in biotech, biopharma these days, in terms of the sponsor CRO business model that we have, and the relationship that we have for the CROs conducting studies for essentially all of the companies now. I think that if anyone has that infrastructure, has the capability to build it and to support decentralized studies, it's got to be the CROs. I think for any company in this day and age that would be a huge investment for an individual pharma company to build that infrastructure to support that type of really truly decentralized study. So I think it's definitely going to have to be the CRO business model to adjust to incorporate decentralized studies and telehealth. I couldn't really comment whether any particular CRO is there today.
Sure.
In that space, but I think it makes perfect sense, given that they are the ones who are central to conducting the vast majority of clinical trials happening today are conducted through CROs.
Do you think that this might result in a culling of CROs or decimation of CROs, because many of them would have to adapt to these new requirements that they've just never had to face before? An investment in,
yeah. I mean, that's the tough question.
We're guessing here.
I don't think necessarily that would be a trigger for a culling.
Okay.
There's always, I guess, the CROs. They often have the larger CROs, the usual suspects, if you like, have experience across all therapeutic areas and have a broad range of capabilities. And then sometimes you will look at CROs who have a specific niche capability, maybe in rare disease or a particular therapeutic area that you're looking at. And so I think they will still exist. One interesting component, actually, now that we talk about it, is any CRO that could develop a specific expertise in decentralized studies, with the viewpoint of harnessing the power of rare patient populations. That would be a truly opportunistic thing to do, because that's where the problem lies in terms of, or that's where the potential lies in decentralized studies, and where the problem lies in getting patients into studies. When you're looking at patient populations that have 1,000 patients per year in the US, or 10,000 patients per year, that's they are tough to find and tough to conduct studies, because the patients are so dispersed. And then you apply that globally. So any company who could then develop a working sort of business model around the concept of decentralized studies and targeting in on being able to facilitate rare disease studies, I think would be a great opportunity, particularly insofar as these are the populations who are arguably most in need of new therapies.
It's an interesting point you raise, because to me, everyone thinks about the value of finding more patients, which 100% there's value, especially in decentralized studies. But I think the point you're making is sometimes it's finding a patient that's harder than finding more patients. So to find 50,000 diabetes patients is not as hard as finding that one patient who has a rare disease state who is not necessarily in a main central city hub. So that's where the value of decentralized studies comes in. One of the corollaries to decentralized studies is the idea of centralized monitoring and centralized monitoring and risk-based monitoring, which technically are corollaries to each other, technically have been around for about 5 years. But conversations I've had with CROs have suggested that, and clients specifically, have suggested that these risk-based monitoring was a great hope. What we really landed up with is just additional monitoring. So the ones that everyone still gets the base amount of monitoring, and then you add on extra visits to sites that probably needed it. Do you find that with decentralized studies, this amount of work is adding up, or do you think it's finally causing a filtration process that's resulting in true risk-based monitoring? Does that question make sense?
It does. I don't know. It's an interesting one. I think that, I certainly totally subscribe to the idea of properly execute a risk-based monitoring. And I suppose some of the challenges there, when you think about, everybody has their own sort of risk tolerance, if you like, and that's guided by their own experience, maybe bad experiences in the past, and so on and so forth. And that's at a personal or an institution level, and so that can be challenging then. And I can see where some may apply that as a baseline for everybody, and additional monitoring for various reasons, depending on the site. I think that you definitely need to strike a balance, and I think that I can see where decentralized studies is going to be in that full model. It would be a challenge to that to the quality oversight. And I think that's again to what we were speaking to earlier, is that presents a challenge that then may slow the progress. Not that it won't progress, but that is one of those again, another sort of obstacle to navigate, if you like, on the road to fully decentralized studies. The idea of decentralized or centralized monitoring of electronic monitoring, certainly that has also come up, obviously, out of the COVID pandemic. When people couldn't get onto sites, having remote monitoring, done of the ECRF and so on. But that obviously presents its own challenges as well around IT systems, access, and privacy, and so on and so forth. And again, because of the very nature of your decentralization, different countries, different sites, the systems are different. It can be quite challenging. And again, that then leads us to be more cautious, I think, in the road to decentralization. But I don't think that any of that makes it not a worthy pursuit. At the end of the day, it's just those obstacles to navigate to make sure that we are, again, the physician-patient relationship, but also the quality of the study and the compliance with GCP.
So finally bringing in the topic of office dynamics, because I was trying to figure out how to pull that in. The big question is, as part, most sponsors will delegate their oversight authority to the CRO, so that they can actually, to the extent possible, to the extent legally allowed, so that the CRO can do their work properly. Having said that, they still retain the responsibility of oversight. Do you find that with decentralized studies, with telemedicine, with risk-based monitoring, with centralized monitoring, it's hard for a sponsor who themselves is now decentralized to help monitor these studies, because to the extent necessary, because all your people are all over the world, if not all over the state, all over the country, all over the world. And has that been problematic, especially since you are working, like you said, with more of a skeleton crew than you prefer to?
I mean, I think the greater challenge. So in terms of the sponsor, monitoring the study, obviously we outsource that right. Monitoring of the study itself to the CRO, and then we are responsible for the outcome of that. But also part of that responsibility is to work to oversee the activities of the CRO itself, and to work with them in partnership. And so I think that's the key is to have an effective partnership with your CRO, such that they are working essentially as an extension of the sponsor itself. And so if you can achieve that, and particularly around the operational aspects and the quality and regulatory aspects, I think that's critical to the success of your program, is that sponsor CRO relationship. I think it's incumbent upon sponsors anyway to have enough resource and enough oversight, satisfactory oversight of the quality of a study, because the last thing you want to do is conduct a great study, file your NDA and then fall over upon GCP inspection.
Yeah.
But that also is a challenge for small companies, and that gets into the idea of how to grow and scale the organization. And that's one of the factors you have to take into consideration as you move as a small company towards your NDA. You have to think about all of the facets of the company that you need to grow and to staff up to make sure that you are prepared for all of the components of the NDA, including the filing itself and the pre-approval inspections that come with it.
So we're running out of time, but I want to ask one question before we sort of close it up. One of the questions I have is that what I hear you saying in many ways is that as a sponsor, you're continuously having to do more with less. And what I'm hearing is you adjust for that by using contractors like CROs, by using data vendors, by using by asking your team to pitch in a little bit harder right now, all while simultaneously not just going, let's do the job we have, but the job we could have, because we're trying to have scalable growth. Mm-hmm. If all of that is happening, how do you as a leader help your staff or your contractors cope with all these changes? And I've seen things like, we send gift cards so you can go with your family, go out for dinner. Or they say, no, the perk is you don't have to come into the office. Or the perk is something else. How are you at Cyrus dealing with the pandemic and keeping employee morale high and contractor morale high?
Absolutely. No, that's a really, it's a really important point. And as a leader, I subscribe to the idea that the leader's role is to really create the environment by which their experts on their team can do their best work, and to be there with them, on the front line doing that work, and and as necessary, rolling up your sleeves and doing the work yourself, and filling the gaps wherever needed to make sure that we deliver on the outcomes that we've signed up for, to make sure that we progress our programs towards NDA and into patients' hands. I think that there are multiple facets of team morale and ways to do that. One is really simply honestly thanking them and thanking them sincerely, and having that dynamic, having that relationship with your team, for them to really to see you, to be authentic, and to say it on a daily basis. Thank you specifically, and not just generally thank you. Because that's easy enough. But thank you for doing X, and really recognize that, and be specific about what you're thanking them for, what you're recognizing when a certain person does a great job. You did a great job doing that, and that was the impact that it had on me and on the team and on the organization. And then there are the usual sort of spot awards and recognition at the company level and so on and so forth. And then obviously everything gets rolled up at the end of the day into bonuses and promotions and so on. But fundamentally, it's having that authentic relationship with your team, and for them to know that they can rely on you for come to you with any problem, and no matter how big it is, we'll solve it together. And again, to make sure that you are thanking them specifically for what they are doing to bring new medicines to patients every day.
Very, very cool. As you know, we're past our deadline, so I'm going to ask you a few questions. The first question, I've sort of put that up there, which is, how can people contact you? And I believe that's your email, apreston@cyrus.com. So if people have questions, people can reach you. Here's a new question that I've added, which is, what's something most people don't know about you?
Wow, that's a tough one. Most people don't know about me. In high school, I played the saxophone.
Did you?
I did.
How Bill Clinton of you.
Thank you. I think you played it a lot better than I did, but I did during high school. It was fun time.
Oh, here's a question. Having to deal with the sponsor, CRO, and vendors is frequently challenging for the sites. What are your thoughts on lessening this burden?
Wow, that's a good question. I think that communication channels and making sure. I think it's incumbent upon the sponsor to make sure that the communication channels are clear. And I can imagine that it would be much tough at the site, at the sites to be peppered with questions and emails from multiple sources, from that same group. And so I think that sponsors and CROs should really try and streamline that communication, bring the right people around the table where a particular decision or a discussion is needed, but have a single point of contact where possible to work with the sites and to build that rapport and that relationship.
It's awesome. Thank you, Ellen, for that question. Going back to our questions, what's something that made you happy in the last week?
Seeing my little 3-month-old baby smile and give us a little giggle. I'm taking it.
I'll take it. That's awesome. What's something you learned in the last month?
Wow. In the last month, I've been really trying to focus on getting enough sleep. And I've learned that is really can change your overall perspective on the day if you do get, 8 hours of sleep, which can be challenging with a big family.
3-month-old.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, and the last question, what would you like to ask the audience?
So, I mean, we talk about team leadership and team dynamics and so on. I'd really be interested in people's perspective on what they see as key leadership traits. I know there's a lot of material about leadership out there, and I'm very interested. It's a topic I'm passionate about. But what do you think are the top 3 leadership traits that you look for in a leader in your organization, or when you're thinking about joining an organization or joining a team?
So I'll give you my answer to that question. I'm not going to give top 3. I'll give you the top 1 that I think about. So the thing on LinkedIn, I'm sure you've seen this because I've seen this a million times. I'm going to sneeze. Allergies. A change of season. Sorry about that. I've seen this on LinkedIn often. It's the image of the leader. The first one is the guy who is on the table sort of whipping people as they pull his table forward, while the other one is the leader who's sort of in the front pulling the table along with everyone else. And the idea in that visual is to suggest a leader is on the front lines, seeing everything and helping their workers. That sounds like such a to me that sounds great at an emotional level, but I think that makes for a terrible leader, because I want my leader to be able to see things I'm not seeing, and that requires a different vantage point. That requires a different level of skills and experience. So I want my leader to be able to jump in as necessary or provide the help as necessary, but let me do my thing without your constant sort of looking over my shoulder, while at the same time having a clear perspective of where we're going. Are we on track? And to me, that's critical for a leader that I think people just don't see enough. So that'd be my thought.
No, that makes perfect sense. I really like that perspective. As the leader, to ask the right questions and to help us test the ideas. We work in an environment where we try during the hiring process to find the best experts we possibly can, into every role. And sometimes they have more experience or in a particular area or overall than the leader perhaps. But the leader's role is to create that environment, to give them the resources they need, to make sure they have an opportunity to discuss and stress test ideas, and to know that they have the support. And you're right, the leader should have that oversight and that overview, if you like, to try and identify problems up the road and make sure that they can guide the team in the right direction.
Very, very cool. Ashley, as always, this was wonderful to have you on. I'm excited to have you back again. And here's the answer from Ellen: clear vision, decisiveness, which is fair, and empathy.
Fantastic.
I'm wondering whether decisiveness and empathy are contradictory, and they aren't. No, I'm wrong. They're fine. There's all. What I like, there's something very clear about Ellen's answer. The clear vision and decisiveness are I can see that. That's a great answer. Do you want to
Absolutely.
comment on that? Or are you okay?
No, I like that. Yeah, I really like that. I think you're right. Decisiveness, you have to have empathy. You have to understand people's perspective, and at the end of the day, we have to help the team get to a decision.
Yeah.
And so, because it doesn't help anybody to get to no decision.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be the leader dictating the decision, but guiding the team to get to a decision so we can move forward. Absolutely.
Exactly right. Thank you again, Ashley. We are looking forward to having you on again, and this was excellent as always.
Thank you very much, Darshan. It's a pleasure.